Season previews, we are now up to the Detroit Red Wings, one of the original six, one of the proudest franchises in NHL history, as long as you don't look at the 70s and the 80s. And what we're into with the Detroit Red Wings is not a 70s and 80s situation. We're not looking at a team nobody wants to play for. We're not looking at a team that can't get anybody into the stands. We're not looking at a team that desperately needs a new arena. Nope, they've got a new arena. According to paid attendance, it's high. Now, if you watch any Detroit games, you'll see a lot of empty seats, but the paid attendance is high. So whether they don't show up for certain games or whether they're off having a drink somewhere else in the arena because it's such a nice arena, it doesn't really matter. According to paid attendance, the numbers are up, and that's all that the NHL cares about. And buy your seat and not show up. It's not like Bettman's calling your house. We noticed you weren't in your seat tonight. I was watching the game. Was everything okay? You fine? No, they're just like, yeah, we got his money. So Detroit, a team that hasn't made the playoffs in a few years. They had 74 points last year, 73 the year before that, 79 the year prior. And that, of course, followed a very long run in the playoffs, which ended in 2016 with a 93-point season. In 2015, they had a 100-point season. So overall, very good numbers for them for a very long time, which makes it odd when they're a team that's a have-not. And they're definitely a have-not at this point. This past season we just experienced, goals for, they had 227, which is 22nd in the National Hockey League. Goals against, they had 277, which is 27th overall. You can't allow 50 more goals than you score and make the playoffs in general. That's a bad idea altogether. Unless it's the 80s. In the 80s, these guys would have been in the playoffs every year. 100%. Now, the end of October, things were already pretty dire for the Detroit Red Wings. They were 3-7-2. Then they had a decent run in November. November was actually pretty good for them, and they ended up 11-11-3 at the end of November. Then the bottom fell out again. By the end of December, they're 15-19-7. End of January, they're 19-25-7. February, they're 23-32-9. March, 31-38-10. And April, 32-40-10. I know there are people who cheer for Detroit that aren't very happy with the fact they haven't won a draft lottery. I will say this, while the whole tanking thing is talked about, winning a draft lottery isn't as important as making sure that you make the most of your draft picks. And Detroit is kind of known for being pretty good with draft picks. And now that Yzerman's there, I think that's going to get even better. I know Yzerman raised some eyebrows with his first-round draft pick this year, including mine, but the explanation that was given immediately thereafter, and just looking at the numbers since then, I can kind of understand it. So, if we're looking for an MVP on this roster, surprise, surprise, I'm picking Dylan Larkin. And there really isn't anybody else that's close. There's no blue liner that's close. There's no goaltender that's close. There's nobody that's close. And I don't mean that as an insult to anybody else. It's just this is Larkin's team right now. Last 5 playoffs, of course, they missed the last 3, and the prior 2 years they were out in round 1 both times. This is not a team that has had any success in the postseason for a long time, which is weird because I can remember all their Stanley Cups they won, 90s, 2000s, and such. But we're into a down time for them. I do think Yzerman will rebuild this team properly. But I don't think it's going to take that much longer. I think we're getting close. Because really it's a matter of building up a lot of good young players and then surrounding them with the right veterans. And Yzerman's joined an organization that already has a number of really good young players. And now it's a matter of surrounding them with the right veterans and filling in a couple of spots that we'll get to. Out of the lineup, the only one I could find really of note that finished the season with Detroit, so I'm not including Nyquist or Jensen in there, is Thomas Vanek. And Vanek's still out there as a UFA. I don't think he signs to a regular contract, but he may get a professional tryout, and he may get one with Detroit, because on the right side, they could argue that they might want him, but honestly, by the end of that season, by the end of last season, I should say, I think it was pretty clear that Detroit was going to be heading in a youthful direction with their scoring. Now, goals leader, I expect it to be Athanasiou this year. While I say yes, Larkin's their MVP, Athanasiou is going to be on a lot of highlight reels. Highlight reel goals involving the Red Wings over the last couple of years, odds are they're probably his. Dark horse for this roster, I went with Moritz Seider. Yep. They didn't draft this kid, so he'd go back to Germany. The nice thing is that because he didn't play in the CHL, if he doesn't make the Red Wings, they can send him back to the American Hockey League. They don't have to send him to a CHL team. So that's one benefit of drafting a guy who came up through the European system. And I would expect them to do it. Seider is 6'3", 208 pounds. So the fact that he's good at everything in the game, he's a very solid all around defenseman, and physically he's imposing as well. He should be able to get in some games this year, even if it's just to play a shutdown role. If they can get him into that mindset, and then the offense can develop over time. What about I have Taro Hirose there because Hirose came up a little bit unheralded and actually had a pretty good run down the stretch. So I'm not going to go crazy and predict that he's going to be a star or anything, but he had a pretty decent run down the stretch. So I would, why not? Why not see him score about 20 goals? Why not? Now, trade bait, I couldn't come up with just one player. I went with veteran players. This is a team that I expect to be out of the running and around the trade deadline be looking to unload some players and get some picks and prospects back. And that's going to be Yzerman's game this year. And then I would expect next summer, make a push for creating a playoff environment. So I would think this would be the last year of the rebuild before, and I use quotes because, officially, I don't know that Ken Holland ever really declared one, and they have enough young players right now that deciding you're going to tear everything down after it's already been torn down. I would think they're going to start to come out of it next year. This year, they may very well improve from, say, 74 to 78, 79 points, but I don't expect a huge increase in their point totals. We'll get to why. Up front, they're actually pretty good. If their top line is Bertuzzi, Larkin, and Mantha, that's not bad. Tyler Bertuzzi is still a guy that I think is going to be the most hated player in hockey. And not for Tom Wilson type reasons, but just because he's a pest. And he's the guy that I think everybody's going to hate playing against. And I think fans are going to really, really detest him when he's on the ice. That's my expectation. And then that leaves the rest of their top six likely Andreas Athanasiou, Franz Nielsen, and Taro Hirose. Now, Hirose may very well lose that second line spot to Zadina, if Zadina comes in 100% ready and about to take off. And Zadina was talked about a heck of a lot less by the end of the season than he was at the start. Didn't have a fantastic run with Detroit at the start of the year. I expect an improvement out of him. I also expect Filppula to push Nielsen for that number 2 center spot. Filppula had a decent year last year for the Islanders. And Darren Helm on the left side on that third line. That's kind of where he ends up being stuck for as long as he's a Red Wing, which I don't know how much longer that's going to be. I would not be surprised to see Darren Helm, a guy who draws some interest and maybe gets moved around the deadline. Now, fourth line, you're looking at likely Jacob Delarose, Luke Glendening, and Justin Abdelkader. Abdelkader's contract's been bad for a while, and it's been one that Detroit's likely been looking to move for a while, and nobody will touch. That being said, this fourth line's interesting because I don't have Michael Rasmussen in this lineup, and I don't have Christopher N in this lineup. So, Rasmussen may very well jump in for Delarose, but with Rasmussen, a high draft pick, relatively high draft pick, right? Shouldn't he be playing top minutes? So do you want him to play a fourth line role in Detroit, or would you rather see him maybe dip his toes in the minors a little bit and get top 6 minutes and then come up with there's an injury in the top 6? So that's going to be interesting. And then you've got Ryan Kuffner, who also came in towards the end of the year. Didn't make the same impression as Hirose, but he's still an option. Dominic Turgeon, who re-upped with them about a week ago, and Joe Veleno is out there as an outlier. Joe Veleno, who may very well make the team. He had a chip on his shoulder this year, played really, really well in the Ontario Hockey League, and having a pretty good summer too, from what I've been reading. So Veleno, he may end up pushing for a roster spot, and if he does, if you end up with a situation where Veleno and Rasmussen show, hey, they need to play every night and they're ready to go now, you may accelerate an attempt to trade, I would say Nielsen. I would say Nielsen would be the one they'd look to trade. If Veleno comes in camp and goes, I am ready, I can be a skilled center, and if Yzerman says, all right. Yzerman, I don't think will show any fear of making a big move here if he needs to. So if a rookie comes in and pushes a veteran out of a job, that's what happens, and that veteran's going to be gone. On the blue line, it's going to be interesting. It's the only thing I can say. You got DeKaiser, Green, Nemeth, Hronek's good, promising. Chalewski, who had a bit of he had a good start, and then it kind of fell apart for him after that. And Trevor Daley. So Jonathan Erickson and Madison Bowie. Bowie's probably going to play regularly, but I'm not sure who on the right side he'd bump out unless they move him over to the left and they bump out Nemeth. Jared McIsaac still shows as injured. If he can be good to go, maybe he pushes for a spot. Oliver Kasky is on there as well, who was signed this past spring. Joe Hicketts, who had a handful of games. And then there's Moritz Seider. And if Seider is ready and if he can play, it's going to be a very odd-looking blue line. I have no idea who's going to end up playing where. I really don't. I do know that the Daley, I could see him ending up not being in the top 6. And Green, we'll see where he ends up too. Whether he ends up on the first pairing or the second pairing. If Seider comes in and if he's as good as the general manager seems to think he is, he's going to get games to start the season. And again, with that size, if he can play well defensively, and if he adds a little bit of jump to that blue line, it's going to be really hard to argue that he should be pulled out at any point in the lineup. From the lineup, I should say. So, goaltending is the one area I look at on this team and I say, yeah, that's going to be a problem. And that's because while Jimmy Howard has some very good runs, he's no longer a premier goalie in the league. And Jonathan Bernier, he's not a starter. And last year, Detroit gave him no support. So if Bernier had a good game, didn't matter, they didn't score goals. Bernier's numbers look kind of ugly at the end of the year, but he did have some good runs in there. And then for third goaltender playing in the American League, it'll be Calvin Pickard. And then just as an interest to me, would Philip Larson then be the next guy to come in? So if let's say Bernier goes down with an injury, do you consider calling up Larson? Larson wouldn't have to clear waivers to go back down. Not that Pickard's going to get picked up on waivers. But Larson, 20 years of age. Do you want to get a look at him? Again, this roster likely not going to be a playoff roster. So would you call up the kid? There's a lot of kids with this roster to consider. They're going to be entertaining, but I don't know that they're going to be particularly good. And if I had to pick a finish in this division, I would say likely 7th or 8th. I can't project them being higher than that. To me, there's too much youth, too much uncertainty, and that blue line, I can't project them being higher than 7th in the division. The Atlantic is going to be brutal this year, and so for that reason, I do expect their points probably to go up a bit, but they won't get any closer to the playoffs. 79, 80 points is probably about where they would top out. Maybe they get above 500, but it's going to be tricky. But, like I said, the good news is I am projecting them to go up. I am also projecting that the Detroit Red Wings, I do think the darkest days are pretty much done. And what we'll be seeing from here is an entertaining team that's adding all of these kids, and then we get to see where those kids end up, and we get to watch their careers grow, which is some of the most fun stuff you can do as a hockey fan, is watch all that. So there you go. The Detroit Red Wings, not predicting them to finish very high in the standings, but I also think that some of the darkest days are done, and Steve Yzerman being in as GM means it could get better as soon as next season. This season, probably one more year of kind of up in the air results, but next year could be very good. So let me know your thoughts, as always, in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and hey, you're all caught up on the 2019-2020 roster of the Detroit Red Wings as it is on August 3rd. And, of course, lineup subject to change between now and the start of the season. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.